The classified cables from Joint Staff laid bare the implications. CENTCOM's directive, executed with a swiftness that belied its complex strategic underpinnings, has not merely shifted assets across the Middle East. It has, perhaps irrevocably, altered the delicate balance of kinetic deterrence in a theater already bristling with flashpoints. What if this move, hailed by the State Department as a necessary recalibration of American power and lauded by the legacy media as a decisive stand, is in fact a symptom of a deeper malaise? A bureaucratic maneuver masking a profound strategic vulnerability that places our warfighters at greater risk and emboldens our adversaries? This isn't just about the movement of a carrier strike group or the deployment of another squadron of F-35s. This is about the very structural integrity of American global power projection, the efficacy of our military doctrine, and whether the Pentagon bureaucracy can still deliver a lethal force focused on actual threats rather than ideological battles or budget line maintenance. The core question we must grapple with is this: how does a seemingly pragmatic shift in force posture in a critical region expose the fundamental compromises within a bloated military-industrial complex, ultimately eroding the lethality of the American warfighter and the credibility of our strategic deterrence on the global stage? Let's be precise. The observable geopolitical event at hand is the recent, significant repositioning of U.S. air and naval assets within the CENTCOM area of responsibility. We've seen critical air superiority platforms, alongside their associated logistical support and maintenance cadres, shifted from the northern Arabian Gulf to a more easterly, forward-deployed position. Concurrently, a substantial portion of a Naval Expeditionary Combat Command unit, typically focused on port security and maritime interdiction, has been tasked with an expanded land-based mission, ostensibly for perimeter defense of a newly designated logistics hub. This is not a subtle adjustment. It is a pronounced, publicly communicated reorientation, framed as enhancing regional stability and bolstering defenses against emergent asymmetric threats. The narrative pushed by official channels speaks of dynamic force employment and deterrence by denial, presenting it as a proactive measure designed to project undeniable American resolve in a volatile region. But peel back the layers, and the motivations become far more complex, often contradictory, and deeply rooted in the bureaucratic machinery of the Pentagon and the insatiable appetite of the defense industry. On the surface, the rationale provided cites intelligence assessments pointing to increased proliferation risks and a heightened pace of adversary-sponsored proxy activity. It suggests a need to harden critical infrastructure and project a more visible deterrent presence. Yet, within the earring, where the real decisions are often shaped, a different calculus is at play. This move, in part, serves to justify existing budget allocations for specific platforms. An air superiority squadron, having recently undergone a costly block upgrade, needs a tangible mission to demonstrate its value for future appropriation cycles. A naval expeditionary unit, facing potential reductions in its budget, suddenly finds new life and expanded scope by taking on a land-based role, blurring doctrinal lines and creating new requirements for specialized equipment. Equipment, naturally, that will be sourced from favored contractors. This isn't just about readiness. It's about bureaucratic survival, maintaining relevance, and ensuring the continued flow of resources to specific programs and commands that have cultivated deep relationships within the congressional appropriations committees and the defense industry. The realities of strategic doctrine and force posture tell an even more sobering tale. The principle of deterrence by denial posits that an adversary will be dissuaded from an action if they believe their objectives cannot be achieved due to the overwhelming defensive capabilities arrayed against them. However, for true deterrence by denial to be effective, it requires not only sufficient kinetic capacity, but also the political will to employ it decisively and an unambiguous signal that such employment is inevitable should a red line be crossed. The current repositioning, while moving high-value assets, concurrently exposes vulnerabilities. By consolidating air assets in a more forward, concentrated posture, we potentially create a single, more lucrative target for an adversary employing swarm tactics or precision long-range fires. The dispersion of air defense capabilities designed for broader area protection suddenly becomes stretched, creating gaps that a cunning adversary could exploit. Furthermore, the land-based assignment for a naval unit, while superficially demonstrating jointness, can dilute its specialized maritime capabilities over time, degrading its core mission effectiveness in an increasingly contested maritime domain. This isn't merely a shift, it's a calculated gamble that assumes the adversary will react precisely as our models predict, rather than exploiting the new force distribution for asymmetric advantage. This kind of thinking, born in sanitized briefing rooms, often fails to account for the kinetic reality of the battlefield, where the enemy gets a vote and rarely plays by our rules. The global consequences of such a move reverberate far beyond the immediate CENTCOM AOR. Our adversaries, specifically revisionist powers like China and Russia, meticulously observe these deployments. For Beijing, a significant commitment of U.S. resources to the Middle East is not just a regional affair. It's a strategic resource drain that diverts attention and assets from the Indo-Pacific, their primary theater of strategic competition. Every F-35 squadron, every Aegis destroyer, every intelligence-gathering asset committed to the Gulf is one less available for a potential contingency in the South China Sea or the Taiwan Strait. This offers a tacit invitation for China to accelerate its own regional assertiveness, knowing that American bandwidth and material are finite. Russia, on the other hand, views this as an opportunity to further entrench its influence in the Levant and North Africa, capitalizing on perceived U.S. overstretch and the desire of regional actors for alternative security partners. Their asymmetric doctrine thrives on creating chaos and exploiting power vacuums, and a complex, resource-intensive U.S. realignment in the Middle East provides ample such opportunities. Our nominal allies in the region, while publicly welcoming the increased U.S. presence, privately express concerns about the long-term commitment and the potential for increased regional instability, worried that a concentrated U.S. footprint might draw them deeper into conflicts they wish to avoid. Or conversely, signal a reduced willingness to intervene decisively if our assets are deemed too vulnerable. Behind the polished PowerPoints and carefully worded press releases, the earring reality is far grittier. Inside the Pentagon, the decision to reposition these assets was not unanimous. There were robust internal debates, particularly from flag officers and senior civilian strategists who understood the broader implications for global force posture. Concerns were raised regarding the opportunity cost, the undeniable truth that every resource allocated to CENTCOM is a resource not allocated to PACOM or EUCOM. Intelligence assessments, particularly from the more unvarnished elements of the intelligence community, likely detailed adversary counter-strategies that went beyond simple deterrence, outlining pathways for gray zone escalation, hybrid warfare tactics, and even precision strike options against the newly concentrated U.S. footprint. However, these dissenting voices often get drowned out by the relentless momentum of bureaucratic inertia and political directives. The directive likely came down from political appointees, filtered through the Joint Staff, and translated into operational orders with a focus on compliance rather than optimal strategic outcomes. Commanders on the ground, accustomed to making do with less, are now scrambling to adapt to a new posture that may stretch their logistical chains to the breaking point and force them to make difficult choices about personnel readiness and equipment maintenance. The can-do attitude, while admirable, can sometimes mask a deeper strategic myopia, where tactical victories are prioritized over grand strategic positioning. This is where the administrative rot begins to fester, where the illusion of activity supersedes actual lethality. The long-term implications for U.S. global supremacy are stark. Each such move, ostensibly designed to project strength, becomes a litmus test for America's ability to conduct multi-theater operations effectively without compromising its primary strategic objectives. By shifting significant resources to address regional flare-ups in the Middle East, we inadvertently signal to peer competitors that our strategic bandwidth is indeed finite and can be exploited. This reinforces the perception of U.S. strategic overstretch and encourages adversaries to pursue their ambitions in theaters where they perceive American resolve to be less robust or its resources more thinly spread. Furthermore, it creates a dangerous precedent where regional actors may deliberately escalate tensions, knowing the U.S. response will often involve the commitment of additional resources, effectively drawing the United States deeper into conflicts of their choosing rather than our own. This isn't a path to maintaining global supremacy. It's a path to becoming a global fire brigade, perpetually reacting to symptoms rather than addressing the root causes of instability, all while hemorrhaging precious resources and strategic focus. To understand the full gravity of this, one must delve into the mechanics of defense acquisition, a system often decoupled from genuine warfighter needs. Consider the platforms now being positioned: advanced fighter jets, precision strike munitions, sophisticated missile defense systems. Each of these represents billions of taxpayer dollars, often procured through processes riddled with requirements creep, cost overruns, and a revolving door between Pentagon officials and defense contractors. A specific system's performance in a particular exercise or a perceived gap in regional capabilities can quickly become a multi-billion-dollar lobbying effort, leading to production contracts that prioritize corporate profits over battlefield efficacy. For instance, the very notion of a newly designated logistics hub often entails substantial infrastructure upgrades, airfield expansions, hardened shelters, advanced C4ISR integration, all of which require new contracts, new construction, and a fresh wave of acquisitions for everything from specialized generators to advanced perimeter security systems. This cycle of perceived need driving procurement, often amplified by industry-funded think tanks and congressional allies, creates a self-licking ice cream cone where the primary beneficiaries are not the war fighters or the taxpayer, but the defense industrial base itself. The move thus becomes not just a strategic repositioning, but a mechanism to keep the machinery of defense spending churning, regardless of its ultimate contribution to national security. Let's ground this in historical context. This isn't the first time the U.S. has poured vast resources into a region only to find itself entangled in conflicts of uncertain strategic value. The post-Vietnam era saw a similar introspection about global commitments, leading to the Weinberger-Powell Doctrine, which emphasized clear objectives, overwhelming force, and an exit strategy, principles that have been systematically eroded over decades of nation-building and stabilization missions. In the Cold War, every deployment was measured against the overriding imperative of containing the Soviet Union, and deviations were rigorously debated. Today, the strategic clarity is often obscured by a proliferation of threats and an administrative state that prioritizes process over kinetic outcome. The current CENTCOM maneuver, while presented as a response to a specific threat, echoes the pattern of incremental commitments that, over time, aggregate into significant strategic liabilities. It's a classic example of what General Eisenhower warned against: the military-industrial complex gaining unwarranted influence, pushing for deployments and procurements that serve its own self-preservation rather than the nation's highest strategic interests. We see a similar pattern to the early deployments in the Balkans or parts of Africa, where seemingly minor presence eventually ballooned into protracted engagements, draining resources and attention from core great power competition. The precision required in military operations is often undermined by this very bureaucratic complexity. Consider the doctrine of interoperability. The public narrative suggests that U.S. forces, alongside regional partners, seamlessly integrate their capabilities. The reality on the ground is far messier. Different command and control systems, disparate logistical pipelines, varying levels of training and maintenance standards. These are not easily overcome by simply moving units. A new logistics hub requires not just physical infrastructure, but the complex digital architecture to manage inventory, track personnel, and ensure secure communications across multiple agencies and potentially allied forces. This is where the rubber meets the road. The theoretical elegance of a strategic shift often collides with the gritty reality of fragmented systems and the sheer friction of coordinating diverse organizations. Every layer of bureaucracy, every contractor interface, every political constraint adds another point of failure. This is not about achieving overmatch. It's about navigating a labyrinth, often with one hand tied behind our backs by our own internal administrative pathologies. Furthermore, this force repositioning has direct implications for our strategic deterrence posture against near-peer adversaries. The National Defense Strategy explicitly calls for a pivot towards great power competition, recognizing that China and Russia pose existential threats to American global supremacy. Yet, every time significant assets are drawn back into the Middle East, it sends a signal to Beijing and Moscow that American strategic focus is fragmented. Our ability to project conventional deterrence in the Indo-Pacific, for instance, relies on a robust and available forward presence. When a carrier strike group or an air expeditionary wing is tied up in the Persian Gulf, responding to lower-tier, asymmetric threats, it necessarily reduces our capacity to respond to a high-end contingency elsewhere. This is the definition of strategic overstretch, allowing adversaries to dictate the tempo and theater of our engagements. They understand our resource constraints better than many in Washington, and they actively seek to exploit them. This move, therefore, isn't just about deterring Iran. It's about potentially enabling China's ambitions in its own backyard by creating a perceived vacuum in American power. Let's delve deeper into the insider reality of the decision-making process. Within the intelligence community, assessments of adversary intentions are rarely monolithic. There are often competing analyses, some painting a picture of deliberate escalation, others highlighting opportunistic exploitation, and still others suggesting domestic political motivations behind adversary actions. The challenge lies in which assessments are amplified and which are relegated to the footnotes. In a climate where the Pentagon is constantly justifying its budget and its global footprint, the assessments that support a need for increased deployments or new equipment often rise to the top. The red team analyses, which explore worst-case adversary reactions or the unintended consequences of U.S. actions, often face a tougher uphill battle for senior leadership attention. The E-ring operates on a tight cycle of briefings and reports, often driven by political imperatives rather than purely strategic logic. When a directive comes down from the National Security Council or the Secretary's office to show resolve or demonstrate presence, the military-industrial complex stands ready to offer solutions that often involve more assets, more contracts, and more complexity, regardless of whether it genuinely enhances lethality or strategic advantage. This is the insidious weaponization of bureaucracy. Decisions are made not necessarily for the warfighter, but for the administrative state itself. Consider the notion of center of gravity in military doctrine. The center of gravity is the hub of all power and movement, the source of strength for which an adversary derives its freedom of action, physical strength, or will to fight. In the context of the Middle East, various actors possess different centers of gravity. For state-sponsored adversaries, it might be their ballistic missile program, their command and control infrastructure, or their regional proxy networks. For non-state actors, it could be their financial pipelines, their popular support, or their ability to conduct information warfare. A genuine strategic move aims to neutralize or threaten the adversary's center of gravity. Does this CENTCOM repositioning genuinely achieve that? Or does it merely react to observable symptoms of adversary behavior without striking at the root cause? The fear among strategic realists is that such deployments become a costly game of whack-a-mole, addressing tactical manifestations without undermining the adversary's fundamental capabilities or will. It's an expensive dance of deterrence that never quite lands a decisive blow, perpetuating a state of perpetual low-level conflict that benefits no one but the contractors selling the munitions. The politicization of the officer corps further complicates this landscape. In recent years, there's been an undeniable push within certain segments of the Pentagon to align military strategy with broader ideological agendas, often at the expense of pure warfighting effectiveness. When promotion and career advancement are seen as tied to adherence to certain social policies or non-kinetic objectives, it inevitably dilutes the focus on lethality, readiness, and strategic acumen. A move like the CENTCOM repositioning might be framed not just in terms of kinetic deterrence, but also through the lens of values-based diplomacy or soft power projection. While these concepts have their place in grand strategy, they should never overshadow the primary mission of a military: to fight and win the nation's wars. When generals and admirals are more concerned with diversity quotas or climate change initiatives than with securing supply lines or maintaining equipment readiness, the entire institution suffers. This is not about being woke or unwoke. It's about a dangerous diversion of attention and resources from the core competencies that secure national defense. The current CENTCOM directive, while appearing operationally sound to the uninformed, could easily be another instance where political signaling trumps strategic prudence, driven by a military culture increasingly susceptible to ideological capture. This leads us to a crucial element: supply chain vulnerabilities. Any significant force repositioning, especially one creating a new logistics hub, inherently creates new vulnerabilities. Modern warfare is a logistical enterprise as much as a kinetic one. Fuel, ammunition, spare parts, food, water, medical supplies. The flow of these critical resources must be robust and secure. In a contested environment, adversary gray zone tactics, such as maritime harassment, cyber attacks on logistical networks, or even targeted sabotage, can quickly choke off these lifelines. The new forward-deployed posture, while aiming to reduce reaction times, could paradoxically increase the vulnerability of these supply chains by extending their reach and exposing them to new threats. The reliance on host nation support, while politically expedient, introduces another layer of potential instability and dependence. What happens if a key ally faces internal unrest or shifts its allegiances? The intricate web of global supply chains, already strained by recent global events, is not designed for frictionless operations in a high-intensity conflict zone. This isn't just a tactical consideration. It's a strategic Achilles heel that an astute adversary will relentlessly probe. The historical trajectory of U.S. defense institutions reveals a pattern of reacting to immediate threats rather than proactively shaping the geopolitical landscape. From the Cold War's policy of containment to the post-9/11 global war on terror, U.S. military power has often been deployed in a reactive manner, leading to protracted engagements and a gradual erosion of strategic foresight. The CENTCOM move, in this light, appears less as a bold strategic pivot and more as another link in this chain of reactivity. It suggests that despite all the talk of pivot to Asia and great power competition, the U.S. remains deeply entangled in regional conflicts that divert resources and attention from the truly existential threats. This isn't just about resource allocation. It's about the very intellectual framework guiding our defense policy. Are we still thinking in terms of grand strategy, or have we devolved into tactical firefighting, allowing adversaries to dictate the terms of engagement and exhaust our resources piece by piece? The legacy media, in its simplistic narratives, often fails to grasp this deeper structural dynamic, preferring to focus on the immediate spectacle of military deployments rather than the underlying pathologies of the defense establishment. The erosion of strategic deterrence is perhaps the most insidious long-term consequence. Deterrence is not merely about possessing superior firepower. It's about the credible will to use it decisively and disproportionately when vital national interests are threatened. When a superpower appears perpetually stretched, bogged down in regional skirmishes, and making incremental rather than decisive moves, that credibility is diminished. Adversaries begin to perceive a lack of strategic resolve, a hesitation to unleash the full kinetic force of the American military for fear of escalation or domestic political backlash. This emboldens them to push the boundaries, to test red lines, and to engage in more aggressive gray zone activities, precisely because they believe the United States will respond with a proportionate rather than overwhelming force. The CENTCOM move, while intended to project deterrence, might inadvertently signal a continued commitment to a strategy of limited engagement, which, in an increasingly dangerous world, can be a recipe for disaster. It is a tacit admission that we are willing to play the adversary's game, rather than force them to play ours. So, as the dust settles on this latest directive from CENTCOM, and the talking heads in Washington spin their narratives about enhanced stability and renewed American commitment, we must ask ourselves the profound question. This isn't just about a localized shift in military assets. It is a profound revelation about the state of our national defense, the integrity of our strategic thinking, and the fundamental choices we face as a nation. It lays bare the tension between a political class driven by immediate optics and a military establishment struggling to maintain its war-fighting edge amidst bureaucratic bloat and ideological distractions. We are at a critical juncture where the illusion of activity can mask the reality of strategic decline. So, as American power is once again tested and redefined in the crucible of global competition, can a nation that often prioritizes administrative convenience and corporate profit over kinetic lethality truly safeguard its interests, restore its dominance, and navigate the treacherous waters of a world that no longer waits for us to decide our own destiny?